What's up guys, Asian here again with another build video. This one's going to be for the Magicka Sorcerer. Just like the rest of our build videos, going to be going over gear, ability bars, and CP distribution, and then we'll end things with a DPS parse, DPS test, just to get an idea of what kind of numbers you can expect with this build. One thing to note here, all this gear is end game gear, best in slot. It's all golded out. So if you're not using golden out gear, your weapons aren't gold, you don't have a VMA staff, that's going to decrease your DPS accordingly. So if you don't have your things golded out, don't expect to pull the same numbers that you're going to see in this video. I'm going to quickly go over the gear here. Scathing a mage, all divines except for the pants. I have infused pants. For scathing, you're going to want divines ideally in all pieces, because the 5-piece proc does depend on your critical damage whenever you deal a critical hit. So the higher your crit chance, the better it is. That being said though, infused and divines, I believe divines only accounts for about a 0.3 to 0.4% increase in your crit chance. So if I were to have divine pants, it'd only go up to 67.6, 67.7%, which isn't that big of a difference. I don't think you'll see that much of a DPS difference between infused and divines as long as you only have one infused piece. Heavy Lambrus, medium Lambrus, 2-piece Lambrus set, both divines again, Magicka enchants. Going to be using gold infallible Aether jewelry. We're going to be using Infallible Aether over Moondancer because, again, we want that extra spell crit. Moondancer only gives us max Magicka, which doesn't improve our spell crit, so we're going to be using Infallible Aether instead. For my front bar, I have a sharpened Moondancer Inferno Staff. Best in slot for this build would be a sharpened IA Inferno Staff, so you get that extra spell damage. Don't have one of those, so we're just going to be using this instead. Back bar is going to be a sharpened Maelstrom Lightning Staff. No enchants, obviously, because you want that Crushing Wall enchantment. This is what you're looking at in terms of stats: about 44k Magicka, 17k health, 10k stamina, 67.3% spell crit, and just under 2,000 spell damage on the front bar. It's pretty good. Spell damage is on the lower end, mostly because we don't have the 4-piece IA set bonus. But that's alright. 2,000 is pretty good for magSorc. For our ability bars, our front bar, we're going to be using Crystal Frags, Crushing Shock, Bound Aegis, since this is a non-pet build, Haunting Curse, Inner Light, and we will be using Shooting Star as our ultimate. For the back bar, we have our Execute, Mage's Wrath, Liquid Lightning, Bound Aegis, and Blockade of Storms. I have Elemental Drain here for my solo parse, but you would normally have Hardened Ward here. Hardened or Empowered Ward on this 5th slot here. Ultimate's going to be your Thunderous Rage, your Destro Staff ulti. Going over our CP distribution here. 75 in Tenacity, 75 in Arcanist. It's not worth putting 25 points for that extra 1% regen. It's those points are better spent elsewhere, particularly in endgame content. 7 in Mooncalf, 4 in Healthy, just to kind of spread out the CP points a little bit. 29 in Warlord to get some reduction in Break Free, and 20 in Tumbling to get some reduction in dodge rolling. This is particularly important for endgame content because you're going to be doing both of those quite a lot. You can also put points into Shadow Ward as well to reduce cost of blocking. Your stamina pools are already limited as a Magicka character, so you're going to want to conserve stamina wherever you can get it. For our our mage constellations, 34 into Elfborn, 56 into Elemental Expert, 19 into Staff Expert, 26 into Master at Arms. This is particularly important for your light attack weaving. Make sure these will definitely help increase your DPS if your light attack weaving is pretty on point. 75 into Thaumaturge for the Exploiter passive. For our warrior CPs, make sure to put points into Hardy and Elemental Defender first. There's currently a bug or a glitch where if you don't put points into these two first, you you will end up not getting the full damage mitigation. 14 points into Thick-Skinned to reduce damage from damage over time effects. What dots you do have in endgame content, they are pretty severely damaging, so you're going to want to mitigate that a little bit with Thick-Skinned. 37 into Ironclad to reduce damage from direct damage. Direct damage is any attack that deals all of its damage in one hit. So things like Force Pulse, Crystal Frags, Haunting Curse, those hits count as direct damage, but things like Liquid Lightning, Elemental Blockade, any damage over time effect, that is not considered direct damage except in very few unique cases. And so most bosses deal direct damage attacks, so Ironclad is going to be very important for reducing that damage you take from there. As a magic attune, we also have 13 points into Bastion to help improve our damage shields. Some other things to point out here, before we start our parse, I'm using Bi-Stat Food here, increase max health, max magicka. Normally you would be using Essence of Spell Power, which is right here, gives you major sorcery, major prophecy, and restores your magicka. But because these are expensive to use for this parse, instead I'm going to be using just normal trash potions. These are potions you can pick up just from adventuring around the world, just to make things cheap, so I'm not wasting spell power pots on a DPS test. So we're going to go ahead and start the DPS test. Don't be afraid to use your ultimate from the get-go. In endgame scenarios and trials, you're going to want to go into your boss fight with an ultimate ready, so this is perfectly realistic. On a solo parse, you have to self-apply Ellie Drain to get your imitate your trials scenario. If you're doing this with another person, with a healer, they can apply Ellie Drain. They can also give you orbs or shards to help resource management. They should not give you Combat Prayer, they should not use Warhorn, they should not use Spell Power Cure, because those are just not realistic trial scenarios. You won't be getting 100% uptime on any of those buffs in a real trial, in real endgame content. So having a healer use that to help boost your DPS parse is unrealistic. You'll be getting an inflated DPS number. So we're going to go ahead and start this parse in 3, 2, and 1. There we have it. That's the parse, about 30.5k DPS. Not a bad parse, that's pretty average for what I've been able to pull with this build. Going to go into combat metrics now just to review our parse. If you're not using combat metrics, it's a very, very useful tool to have to help kind of figure out where you can improve on your DPS, where your DPS is coming from, your buff uptimes, things like that. It's very useful if you intend on improving your DPS. So first thing I'm going to look here is our buffs. See the uptime for Scathing Mage. 54%, that's pretty average from what I've seen using Scathing Mage from all of my parses. The highest uptime I've managed to get on Scathing Mage is 62%. I've heard up to 66% uptime on Scathing Mage, but realistically you're going to be hovering around the 55% uptime for Scathing Mage proc on a magSorc. You can see I had only 10% Crystal Frags proc. That's on the lower end of things. I've had parses where this number is as high as 25%. So there's a little bit of RNG in play here because Crystal Frags does provide a good chunk of your DPS here and there. Going down into the percentage of DPS here, I'm looking specifically at my light attacks. Because I am light attack weaving, I want my light attacks to make up at least 13% of my DPS. In an ideal scenario, they'll be making up at least 15% of my DPS. So looking at light attacks here, I have 7.6 from my fire staff, 5.9 from my lightning staff. So if we add those together, that's about 13.5%. It's a little bit on the low end. It just barely meets that 13% cutoff. It's an arbitrary cutoff that I'm using for myself, but it doesn't quite hit the 15%, which is kind of what I'm shooting for this whole time. Do keep in mind though that this light attack parse is somewhat lowered due to the fact that I have the heavy attack since I don't have a healer to give me orbs. So you can see here 7% of my DPS came from heavy attacks. So do keep that in mind when we're reviewing your parse. If you are heavy attacking, your light attack weaving percentage is going to be lower because you will be heavy attacking on a solo parse. So that's it for this build video. Make sure to practice your rotations, and I will see you guys in the next dungeon.